No.
Welcome everybody. We're just going to wait until we've got everybody in the room before we start. Seconds to let everybody join. Great. Okay, so I think everybody's in. Most people are in. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Nadine from Treeconomics, and you have joined the Tree Equity webinar, which is going to be a discussion of the new Tree Equity score tool and a live demo of how to use it. So on that subject, whilst we're all sort of settling in, there is a QR code on the screen which you should be able to see. If you're going to be sort of doing this alongside on your phone, feel free to scan the QR code there and you can follow along on your phone. If you are doing this on a computer, so what I'm going to do is just pop a link into the chat for you so that you can follow along on your computer screen. If you can see the chat box, there is it should be on the right hand side of your screen. There is a little box and I've just popped a link in there for the Tree Equity Score website. So if you click on that, you should be able to follow along, hopefully. Fingers crossed it'll all work for you. So we've got some lovely speakers here today who I'm going to allow to introduce themselves to you. Shall I hand over to you, Danny, first?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, hi, welcome everyone. It's really lovely to have you all here. My name is Danny and I'm one of the senior urban forest consultants at Treeconomics. I've been working at Treeconomics for almost 5 years. I think we're about a month away from it being 5 years in total, and I tend to lead on a lot of our projects that have a community, a stakeholder or a training kind of focus. I've got a background in education, so it fits really nicely with what I'm interested in. I've also worked with the Woodland Trust on other projects such as developing iTree Canopy for the UK, and I've been helping at various stages throughout the process of bringing Tree Equity Score to the UK. So yeah, it's lovely to have you all here, and I'll hand over to Adam to do his introduction next.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Adam Cormack. I work for the Woodland Trust, which is the UK's largest woodland conservation charity. And there I lead the campaigning team, and that involves managing a few programmes of work, one of which is on urban trees, which has involved over the past 18 months developing Tree Equity Score for the UK, which is what we're going to talk to you about today, partnering with a few other organisations that I'll mention, including American Forests, who are here with us today. So yeah, really looking forward to sharing this with you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lida Al-Jabbar. I'm a senior director with American Forests, one of the organizations that partnered with Adam and his colleagues at the Woodland Trust to build out Tree Equity Score for the UK. So really excited to be a part of this conversation. American Forests is based in America, if you might have guessed. We are a national conservation nonprofit that's focused on restoring and managing and growing our healthy and resilient forests from cities all the way to large landscapes. And so we are really, the last several years, been focused on building a movement for tree equity, which means that we're looking to ensure that the benefits of trees and healthy forests are reaching all people in all cities. And so that includes really focusing on equitable outcomes and planning through our urban forestry work in particular. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Lida. Thank you, everyone. That's great. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we delve in. Somewhere on your screen, probably on the right, you've got a GoToWebinar control panel, which should have a questions section. So if you just click on that, you should get a little space for you to put questions in here. Because we've got a Q&A at the end, we are going to ask you to start putting your questions in as soon as you think of them. Just pop them in here, and Lida will be hosting our Q&A, and she will get to those near the end of the webinar. So just feel free to put them in at any time. And you've also got a little chat function as well. It might be worth keeping that open, because during the webinar I will be putting various links in here. And also feel free to tell us who you are and where you're from in here. That would be really good. Yeah, so have a go with that. But before we start, we're going to do a quick poll to see who we've got with us today. So I'm just going to launch that one. Hopefully you'll fit into one of those categories. Brilliant. So we have 50% local authorities, 57%, sorry, 15% consultants, 15% other, 7%, here we go, 7% academics and 7% NGOs. That's great. Thank you for that. We have got a second poll for you. We know you love polls. Here we go. Have you ever used the Tree Equity Score tool? Okay, I'm going to close that one now. Here we go. So 63% haven't, 37% have had a dabble, but nobody has used it to inform a tree planting programme as yet. So that's really interesting, isn't it? And there are a couple more polls which I think we may be using a little bit later on. So that's that. I am going to hand over to Adam from the Woodland Trust. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, Nadine. Yeah, and I guess given we launched this in December, we perhaps shouldn't be surprised that nobody's organised it, or nobody on this call has organised a tree planting programme yet. Using Tree Equity Score to help guide the kind of prioritisation. So some of that work's happening in the US now. We'll probably come on to that a bit in our Q&A. So let's jump in and demonstrate. Well, firstly, I'm going to kind of give you some background on the development of the tool. That will probably take about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll go into a demonstration. Danny from Treeconomics will lead that, and then we'll go into a Q&A at the end. So pop your questions in as we go. So it's all about the Tree Equity Score, which is a new tool that the Woodland Trust has developed in conjunction with American Forests and the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. So we've adapted a tool that's been built in the US by American Forests, and it's all about measuring how equitable urban tree cover is. So how well are those benefits from urban trees reaching the people living in towns and cities, and then working out where trees are most urgently needed. So we'll come on to show you all of that. And if you've scanned the QR code on your phone, you can start to see how it looks on a phone, or share the link for you to click on and have a look on your desktop if you're joining on a computer. So next slide, please, Danny. So what is Tree Equity Score UK? Well, it's a new standard for assessing levels of urban tree cover. And this is all about looking at the benefits of trees to people. So I haven't got the kind of normal benefits of trees slide, because I'm kind of assuming most people on this call are going to know about the benefits of trees. But Tree Equity Score is a composite measure really of those benefits, and we'll come into what it's composed of in a couple of slides time. But it's blending data from places like the indices of deprivation and the census, with some environmental data on things like heat and air pollution and tree canopy, to get an overall measure of the benefits to people. So it's being used in the States as a prioritisation tool. So it lets you look at a neighbourhood level as well as a sort of local authority and city level at where trees are most urgently needed, where is tree equity lowest. It covers about 35,000 neighbourhoods, and it covers all 4 countries of the UK. So we've got a consistent methodology, so it's the same fields of data, but we're using the census and the indices of deprivation from each country, which does mean that if you're comparing scores, strictly speaking, you should really only compare within countries for sort of consistency. So you're kind of looking at 4
different sort of data sets, if you like, that share the same fields. So overall, we have the tree equity score for the UK. It was launched in 2021 by American Forests, and the Woodland Trust and some other organisations in the UK very inspired by this. We saw it and thought it's like a really good build on some existing thinking and work that's already happened in the UK. So if you go back to reports like Trees in Towns 2 from the noughties, I think that was around 2008, where people like Mark Johnson were overlaying tree canopy data with data from the indices of deprivation. That's been done in a number of cities. It's been done extensively in London. So there are, a number of kind of versions of this out there already, but we felt that this took it on a level in terms of opening up that information to a much wider group of people, potentially anyone really with a computer who can get online. So this is all about trees and then sort of socio-demographic information, blending it together. And then if you want to go on to the next slide, Danny. So it's very much a partnership approach. So the core partners have been the 3 organisations that you can see at the bottom. So that's the Woodland Trust, American Forests, and then the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare, who are a non-profit that lead on kind of public policy around health. Then all these different organisations around the outside, and a number of others as well, have sort of helped in terms of providing feedback, testing the tool, providing expert advice, really over the last 18 months, coming to workshops, coming to webinars. And if there are people on the call from any of these organisations, thank you. You know who you are. And then at the top, Salesforce are the corporate partner of American Forests. So Salesforce effectively sponsored the project and made it possible. We wouldn't be able to do it without their support. So massive thank you to Salesforce. And Google have donated the tree canopy data, and we'll come on to that in a minute. So big thank you to Google as well. Again, wouldn't be possible without the tree canopy data. And as you can see, there's a kind of mix here of non-profit organisations, sort of tree data organisations like Treeconomics, who are hosting today's webinar, and Treeconomics played a very key role in terms of helping us to prepare some of the data sets that went into the tool, including very notably the one on air pollution, but help with sort of technical advice across the board on the tool. And we work quite a bit with Treeconomics on other projects, so it was good to collaborate with them on this. And yes, so a number of city councils and local authorities also provided advice and guidance. Community groups like Birmingham Tree People. So Birmingham Tree People, together with the City Council in Birmingham, have been leading on the kind of local tree equity map in the city. Played a really key early role in terms of helping us to think through the scope of this project. So that's all the partners. So let's go on to the next slide, Danny. So fundamentally, tree equity score tells you about tree inequity, which is sort of inequities in canopy cover. So both these photographs are taken Sheffield on the left and then Grimsby on the right. And you're already looking here at what it looks like in terms of the difference in canopy cover of, I think, around 20% on the left, and then it's well under 10% on the right. And, we know tree professionals working in cities across the country already know about it, sort of inequalities and inequity in canopy cover. I think what this tool is letting us do is actually look at that at a much bigger scale. And everywhere we look, we see these patterns really of tree inequity and inequity in canopy cover following other socio-demographics and sort of social trends. So if we go on to the next slide, Danny. So this is just a few points from some initial data analysis that American Forest did to support the kind of launch of the tool. So this is showing us that the most affluent neighbourhoods have more than double the tree cover. So this is on average, these are average figures across the whole of the UK. So looking at, and this is using income data from the indices of deprivation. So affluence, most affluent areas, more than twice the number of trees. Then we're looking at neighbourhoods where tree cover per person is the highest, less pollution, cooler during a heat wave. And again, that's looking at UK averages. And then neighbourhoods with the most people identifying with a minority ethnic group have roughly half the tree canopy per person, which is sort of closely tracking on income, and that mirrors other work done on health inequity, sort of showing similar trends. So we are in the middle of scoping out peer-reviewed study with the university to move this data analysis into a peer-reviewed study to kind of open it up to peer review really, and kind of building on, it can be built on by other organisations that way. So that's the data analysis. So if you want to go on one, Danny.
So how do we calculate the tree equity score? So it's all about looking at having a canopy cover goal and looking at existing canopy cover, what's that gap, and then using a priority index, which is looking at those indicators of need for trees. So that's looking at things like air quality, heat disparity, data from the indices of deprivation, unemployment, income, health. We use children and seniors as well, calculating a tree equity score out of 100, and the higher the score, closer you are to achieving tree equity, which is about the benefits of trees reaching people living in that area. I want to go on one more slide, Danny. Yes, so the canopy cover data for the tool is supplied by Google. It's all from 2022 and 2023. It's calculated at the neighbourhood level. So we've got percentage canopy cover for 35,000 neighbourhoods here across the countries of the UK. It only covers urban areas, and in the tool you can see precisely what that boundary is, and it's lots of data on methodology on the website, and we can show you where that is in a bit, but and where you can get the kind of full technical information on all of this. But it relates to the land use cover boundary for urban from the ONS. So we're using kind of government definition of what is and isn't urban. It only covers urban areas, which is the same as in the States. And Google's data set uses satellite imagery and machine learning to calculate tree canopy cover. And it works at the neighbourhood scale, which in England means lower super output areas, in Scotland data zones, and the equivalent sort of small area geographies in Northern Ireland and Wales. And it's worth saying we've been doing some sort of testing of some of the Google data. How does it compare to some of the other canopy cover data sets out there? The LiDAR work that Terrasoulis did with Friends of the Earth, the iTree Canopy-led canopy cover mapping project that Forest Research led, that Woodland Trust helped with, use volunteers to do canopy cover assessments using iTree Canopy. What we've seen is a very strong correlation across those sort of data sets. So if you want to move on one more slide, Danny. And Google started supplying this information to people on request. So I'm just showing you here canopy cover map for Birmingham. So there's something called the Google Environmental Insights Explorer, which you can just Google and get to. And you're looking here at actually a fairly low res kind of image of tree canopy data, but you can request high res data at the city kind of level from Google. But this does show you it's the same data set that's used in the tree equity score. So it's showing you the kind of level of details. It's down to kind of individual tree level data. And the Google Environmental Insights Explorer has more data on the kind of technical background, some of this tree canopy data, but it's really means that there's now a lot more information on tree canopy data that's open to the public. You know, wherever you live, if you live in an urban area, you can go on tree equity score and look at tree canopy cover data, and we'll show you how to do that in a minute. Let's go on another slide, Danny. So it relies on setting a canopy cover goal, a universe, and the way this works in the States is done by biome. So there's a canopy cover goal of 40% for cities in forested biomes, so that would be something like Boston, 20% for cities in a grassland biome, Chicago, or 15% in a desert biome, so something like Phoenix or Las Vegas. So the UK is one biome, really. There are definitely sort of differences between things like the coast and inland areas, but sort of biome level, we're one biome. So after a lot of consultation with sort of experts working on trees in the UK, we landed on 30%. And anyone who's spent time looking at local authority tree strategies will know that's a figure that crops up widely. In terms of long-term goals, so 30% is not where you're going to get to next year, probably even in the short to medium term, but long-term goals, 30% crops up a lot in the literature, and I put the 330-300 rule here, which a number of cities are using, and the 30 relates to 30% canopy cover at the community level. The 300 is about access, 300 meters access to a green space. 3 is 3 trees from your window. So tree equity score neatly kind of delivers the middle bit of that, really. But it is adjusted for population density. In less densely populated areas, the goal goes up a bit to up to ceiling of 36. in highly populated areas, it goes down to 24, and that's to avoid coming up with unrealistic goals. And we hope to be able to move to using building density in the future rather than population density. But for now, we've launched with population density like American Forest did in the States. And there's some really interesting data out there on public health benefits of 30% canopy cover, looking at things like sleep levels. So I really recommend a dip into the literature on that. And if you're really, really interested, just you can contact me afterwards, because we've been doing quite a bit of reading and research on that at the Woodland Trust. So I think we've got one or two more slides, Danny, and then I'll pass to you for the demo. So I've kind of summarised this already, but this is the priority index for the tree equity score. So this is where we're synthesising data that relates to the multiple benefits of trees to bring it into the score. So we're looking at air quality, nitrous oxide, and PM2.5 data for the Environment Agency. We're looking at age, so that's the percentage of older people and children versus working age adults. So note the dependency ratio. That's used as a measure of kind of social vulnerability globally in terms of looking at population vulnerability. Looking at health, unemployment and income data, all from the indices multiple deprivation, and then heat disparity. That's looking at temperatures during a heat wave and average temperatures. Do you want to go on one more slide, Danny? And together that creates a tree equity score out of 100. And one more slide, and maybe it. Yeah, so that's a QR code. We gave you another one at the start. You probably don't need to scan that one actually. So Danny, I think we're ready to probably do the demo. So that's the background. So we've been working on this. It launched in, okay, one more slide, yeah. So I think there's an interesting idea in here in terms of equity and how we bring that into canopy cover planning, tree strategies, things like that in the UK. So this, you can't really read, I've highlighted the text from, it's a policy brief from the UN on sustainable urban forestry, just been published. And this talks about environmental equity in terms of the fair and equal distribution of the benefits should be part of any sustainable urban forest programme as called for in the Sustainable Development Goal. So this is about linking, the work that you are all doing on kind of urban forestry and urban trees right up to the UN Sustainable Development Goals via the concept of environmental equity. I feel like we're at the early stages of this. So I think in the Q&A in a short while with Leader and American Forests, we might get on some of the work that's been that's underway in the States. And there are sort of pockets of this happening around the UK. But the tree equity score is introducing a new sort of standard that will hopefully help us to take a bit of a big leap forward really in terms of bringing those social goals around equity into the work that we're all doing on urban trees. So I think that's it, Danny. Do you want to have a look? In the US, yes, so launched in 2021, has generated massive investment from the federal government into urban forestry, working at a variety of levels, state and local policy, and some brilliant community level work happening in places like Detroit that's sort of galvanizing people around tree equity. I think we'll come on to some of that in the Q&A in a minute.
So I can't actually, oh, it's a bit echoey. I can't actually see whether you can see me, but hopefully my cameras come back on. But Nadine and Adam, do let me know if it's not coming up on the screen. But thank you, Adam. That was a really nice introduction. I think really highlighted kind of how the tool was developed, why and why it's been developed, and why people should be using it in their work. So hopefully what I'm going to talk a bit more about now is how to use the tool, not just how to use it sort of in the demo, but also how it kind of integrates into the wider work of tree officers, tree managers, and sort of other local authority professionals throughout the country. So I did start with the benefits of trees, but I'm not going to dwell on it because I think most of us are probably here for a very similar reason, and probably all are well versed in the benefits of trees, but it's always a nice place to start. I did want to start with this slide though. So this shows kind of a really nice infographic that Treeconomics have produced. So it's about the sustainable urban forest journey. Our mission as an organisation is to create sustainable treescapes for everyone. So helping people at various stages throughout this journey And tree equity fits in beautifully in this sort of first stage, this foundation stage. So it's a really nice tool to use at the very start of your journey, or perhaps at the start of writing a tree strategy, to just get a feel for your canopy cover and how that relates to your population and kind of the climate locally, not just within your local authority, but perhaps also in the wider area and the sort of neighbouring local authorities that are near to you. And taking that first foundation step with tree equity then helps you to move forward into your kind of assessment stage and prioritising your work and being able to be strategic about how you're kind of approaching your management of the urban forest. And I'm going to delve straight in now to the demo. So as we said at the start, if you would like to follow along on your devices at home, on your computer or your phone, you're more than welcome to. We'll obviously record the webinar as well, so you can always watch now and then have it as a sort of companion for future. So I'm just going to switch over screens because we need to go online. I'm going to do this sort of live, so I'm hoping it will share well, but of course if you have any problems with viewing it, just again just shout. We have done a test and it was all fine, so hopefully hopefully it will work really well. So I'm going to just is
there any way you can quickly share the QR code again? A couple of people are asking for the QR code to be
yeah, 1 second, let me open the slideshow again. It's on the first screen. Does it come up now? Can you see that?
Yes, that's right, yes. So there's a couple of people who did that, so go ahead and snap away at that QR code and hopefully that should work for you. Thanks, Danny.
That's okay, no problem. I'll just pause for a second and let people scan it and then I'll move back across. And also if you struggle with the QR code, Nadine popped the link I think in the chat box as well, so you can always click on the link in there. But Adam said it works really nicely on a phone, so if you want to join that way, that's absolutely fine. Right, I'll close that one again and come back onto the web page. So yeah, this is Tree Equity Score. This is the sort of first page that you come to when you load the website. We're going to click on this green button and start our kind of journey. So you'll see as you load up the screen, there are some green areas shaded on the map. And as Adam said earlier, the Tree Equity Score is a solely urban focused tool. So these are all the urban areas within the UK that you can use the tool to assess. So there are two ways you can start off. You can either search for a location or you can just zoom in and find where you want to go. We're going to start today with London. I've just chosen it as a demonstration city because there's lots of variation. It's also a place that probably lots of people on the call will be familiar with. So I'm going to just zoom in because I know exactly where I'm going. But as I say, if you want to search for a location, that's probably quicker if it's more precise. So so this is our map here of London. This is probably the first most helpful place to come when you're starting to use the tool. I'm going to kind of talk through this as in an example. So we're going to pretend that perhaps I'm a tree officer within London. I'm going to pick Westminster as my example. Just it's a central location. It's got a nice variation of scores. And it was one of the first ones I clicked on when I opened the first tool. So we're going to pretend that I'm a tree officer in Westminster, and I've basically been tasked with the mission of writing a tree strategy for my borough. And the first stage that I've come to within that sort of foundation stage is starting to use Tree Equity to kind of build a picture for the local authority and kind of the makeup of Tree Equity within it. So if it was me, I would firstly definitely want to be looking at, okay, well, my Tree Equity score, my combined score is 85, but what are the sort of neighbouring boroughs? Because they're going to be probably the most relevant in terms of comparison. You're likely to have very similar challenges, of course, not in all of the locations, but it's probably a really helpful exercise to firstly just see where your score sits within the kind of locality. So you can really easily do that. You can just move your cursor around the other local authorities, which are all outlined on the map, and it will show you their composite score. So that's just built a picture. There's quite a lot of variation actually in just those sort of nearby boroughs already, which is really interesting. Now, in terms of the colouring, areas that are shaded in the darker green are going to have a much higher score, which means they're a much lower priority, whereas your areas that are closer to orange are the areas that are of greater need. So that's the same throughout the whole of this exercise. So I'm going to just zoom in a little bit now into Westminster. And you can start to see all of the tree equity scores for the borough. I'm just going to move it a little bit so I can see. So we've got quite a variation. We've got areas over this side which are already reaching 100, which in terms of what does that actually mean? It basically means it's got enough trees. So in terms of the tree equity score and in terms of its priority, it's not actually a priority anymore. What you do want to be looking at first of all are these areas highlighted in orange, which have got a much lower tree equity score and are going to be definitely either your high or highest priority areas. So we've got a cluster here on the sort of eastern side, and then up here in this top corner we've got lots and lots of orange neighbourhoods that are going to definitely be ones that we're going to talk about today. So just to start us off, I suppose, with the very first level of analysis that you might want to do, if I click on this one here, I'm just using it as an example because it's a nice big one to see on the screen. As you can see, it's got already a really high score of 100. It has a priority of none because it's already got enough tree cover. It's reached its canopy goal. But what you can see, which is really helpful on the spider diagram, are what are the challenges that this this neighbourhood faces within the Westminster Borough. So just because it's got all the tree cover it needs doesn't mean it doesn't also face challenges. So as you can see, the two major factors here are air pollution and heat disparity, and those are probably some of the key considerations for the tree manager within Westminster. Now it's probably quite helpful to zoom in a little bit and just understand what does that look like in reality. So you can go onto the layers tab and there's lots of different options which I'm going to talk through in a moment, but I'm just firstly going to have a look at using the satellite layer so I can actually visualize what does that look like in reality. So if I zoom in, this is obviously Hyde Park, so it's a very treed area. You can see all of those lovely mature canopy trees in the base map, which is really helpful. And it's really nice then when we look perhaps at a neighbouring neighbourhood which has got a much lower score, such as this one. If I go back to the original screen, this is actually prioritised as one of the highest need areas, so it's got a very low canopy cover of 5%, and it's got lots of challenges in terms of not only air pollution and heat disparity, but also with regards to the index of multiple deprivation. So I find this chart's really helpful when you're doing a quick glance across lots of areas, because you can get a really quick snapshot as to why is that score what it is for that area. So it just helps to build a picture, because it will vary a lot even with, you know, boroughs right next to each other. So I feel that this is a really helpful tool for just getting that really quick snapshot about what's going on locally. So if you were, you know, trying to write your tree strategy and you're starting to try and sort of understand what's going on, I'm going to zoom out a little bit now so we can see the whole of the borough again. You might want to have a look at some of these other layers tabs. So it's really helpful for being able to kind of isolate those priority variables. So being able to look at things like canopy cover. So if I click on this one, it's going to show us the distribution in canopy cover. Again, very similarly to the start, you can just hover over any of these neighbourhoods and it will instantly show you their canopy cover. And you can quickly see that these big parkland areas obviously have the highest level of canopy cover, as you would expect. And this area up here, which we saw earlier, which had quite high levels of priority, has very low canopy cover, sort of 4 and 5%. Some of the other ones which you might want to look at, the priority index will show you the kind of combined score for all of these layers that you can see below, which Adam talked about, all come into that priority index, which is used to calculate the tree equity score. I thought perhaps we might like to look at air pollution. I find that looks much clearer if you use the default rather than the satellite base map. It's just, I think the colouring is much clearer. So you can see in this ward, obviously there's much darker areas that are closer to the city centre. So these darker shades of brown are going to be areas with much higher levels of pollution. And as you move sort of out of the borough, out towards the outskirts, these start to decrease. The other one that I think is a really helpful one to look at, or is likely to be high on your radar, is sort of heat disparity. So that's looking at the extremes of heat versus the kind of average across the whole borough. So you've got some real hot spots. You've got this area right in the centre here, which is very central London. So it's obviously going to be challenging there to plant trees, but you can see there is obviously a great need for them. And again, this area up here that's been highlighted again. So not only has it got a high tree equity score and a low level of canopy cover, it's also got sort of one of the greater challenges in terms of heat. So for the people who are living here, in hot temperatures, they're going to have far less protection and shade provision by trees when compared with some of these areas over here. So as I say, there's lots of other layers that you can look at that are really helpful. You can obviously, take a screen grab of some of these maps if it's helpful for your tree strategy. But it's just really helpful to visually be able to see that distribution across the borough. Now, the other really helpful tool that you can do within your analysis is you can use this filters tab down the bottom. So this will actually remove wards remove neighbourhoods that are not included within your search. So you can choose lots of different options. It has all the same things as we had in the previous tab. And what's really helpful throughout the tool, I thought this was a really good idea, and I found it really helpful myself when I've been navigating around, is if you hover over any of those little question marks, it will bring up a text box, and that will talk you through either what the data variable is, or what does that actually mean, or where has the data come from. So super quick and easy to find that information. When I've been doing other sort of similar work on other tools, sometimes it's quite difficult to go off and find out, what does that mean, or where has this data come from, or that kind of thing. So I think that's really helpful, and that, as I say, that's right from the beginning throughout the tool. So a couple of the filters that you might want to use, obviously you could do any of them. You might want to start by looking at your tree equity score, and you might want to say, actually, I just want to look at areas that are classed as high or highest priority. So if you set this at, say, 79, then you're going to see areas that are classed in those top two categories. I obviously know 79 because I've checked on the scores what the ranges are for highest, high, moderate, and the other two, and you can do that within the tool. I'll show you in a moment, but I've just noted it down so I can do it very quickly on the webinar. But you can set your filters to various places, so you might want to just highlight those areas that are really high priority and that you want to go straight to in terms of your analysis. So as we say, this area has come up again in this central area, or you might want to just filter it literally for just the areas that have highest priority, which for this boroughs, we've got these areas here as well. The other thing that I think is really helpful, you can have multiple filters on at the same time. I'm not going to do that today just because it might get a bit complicated if we're trying to look at multiple variables. So I'm just going to set them all back to the start each time. But another one that's probably really important and very helpful is looking at canopy cover. So as Adam said at the start, obviously people are regularly using a 30% canopy cover goal or are working towards that. So you could put in areas that are 30% or lower. So as you can see, it's immediately removed those areas of parkland, but we could also look at even lower. So we could go down to 20% and see, okay, which neighbourhoods have got less than 20% canopy cover. And if you really want to look at your real high priority areas, you could look at areas with less than 10% canopy cover. And as we say, we saw these areas before, but it's really helpful because it's actually identified this little hotspot here in the middle as well. So that's a really helpful thing that we can look at. I've just realised we've actually still got the heat layer on, so I'm going to go back and turn that one off just so we can see the tree equity scores, because it might get a bit confusing if we've got too many things going on. So we can look at all these different variables all the way through. So you can look at pollution, you can look at some of the population statistics that Adam talked about, We might want to look at heat disparity. So I'm going to look at a range which shows me sort of the areas that are struggling the most with heat, and that's just highlighted those for me as well there. It's quite interesting because this area seems to come up a lot, but we've got a cluster here. There was a cluster that come up down here for one of the other variables, and it just helps you to really prioritise and focus your efforts on the areas of greatest need. So the final thing that I wanted to kind of show you is the, I'm just going to have to move the webinar panel, there we go, is the reports tab. So this is a super helpful feature for anyone trying to put together a tree strategy or a similar strategy or reports, particularly useful if you're trying to apply for funding and you need some data and information to really clearly show, you know, demonstrate the need for funding and the need for priority in specific areas. So you can look at the report at various different levels. You can look at local authority, constituency or country level, which is really useful. Just for this exercise, I'm going to look at the Westminster local authority report, but do feel free to look at some of the others at the points. So it's a PDF report. You can download it, print it straight out of the trajectory score if you want to, but there's a few things that a few options that you can select and you can change, which is really great. So it gives you that composite score that we saw right at the beginning before we zoomed in to see the neighbourhood level. So when we were just looking at all the local authorities around London, so it gives you the score of 85. It also gives you the key statistics and key data around the population and pollution, which you know, perhaps for funding applications, this sort of data is really helpful to have to hand. I particularly like this map. It's a really simple way of sort of quantifying how many neighbourhoods or lower super output areas are of high or highest need. So it actually tells you how many if you hover over it. So it tells me that within the Westminster borough, we've got 5 neighbourhoods that are the highest priority and are going to be of key focus, and then we've got a further oh, it's not showing me, I'm not sure why, but normally when I hover over this one, oh, there we go. There are further 27s. That's, you know, that's about what, 32 neighbourhoods that have already come up as high or highest priority to go within your strategy. But it also gives you information about those neighbourhoods that have already got you know, are already considered to have enough tree cover when considering the other factors, and also the areas that are of sort of much lower concern. So it's really helpful to be able to understand that actually how many LSOAs are we talking about when we're putting together reports. And there's also this chart here on this screen which shows you tree canopy per person versus, and you can choose which variable you want to have at the bottom, which is really useful. So this is the chart showing you heat disparity, but on this drop down, if you click, you can actually choose whether you want to look at air pollution, and again it shows you all of that information. And if you want to look at income, then it will show you that again the tree canopy per person versus income, which is really helpful. And the final thing that I'm going to show you, which is good because I think we're coming close on time, is it's about sort of setting a target and how you're going to get that. So it automatically sets your target at 75. You might want to start a bit lower than that maybe for the first one, but you might want to increase it. So you might want to say, actually, I want all of my neighbourhoods to be I want to have no neighbourhoods in the high or highest priority categories. I want everything to be moderate or lower in terms of its priority or its need. So if you up that to 80, that will show you, as you increase the tree equity score goal, it shows you how much canopy is needed to reach that goal. It does detail in here as a sort of average value, sort of the number of trees that might indicate. Obviously, that's a very average value for sort of a medium tree, but it gives you a flavour or a picture. And in addition to that, it will also tell you about the sort of added ecosystem service value of that canopy, and it breaks that down into the quantities of carbon, of avoided runoff, pollution removal, which is really helpful. And I particularly like these sort of little context boxes which kind of put it into something you can visualize. It's very hard to sort of picture in your head what 6.2 million litres of water would look like, but 95 standard swimming pools is, I mean, it's still tricky, but it's much more visual and much easier to kind of quantify it. And the last thing that comes on the report is obviously a map of the tree equity scores across the borough. So a really helpful tool that you can download, and you can, as I say, you can just print it at the top of the page. You can just print it as a PDF, or you can share it directly from the web page. So that's the end of the demo that I was going to go through. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we'll go into, I think Adam might like to point out a couple of extra bits, and otherwise we'll go into the Q&A. But thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Dan. I think we can go straight to the Q&A, Danny.
Okie dokie.
Great demo. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much to both Adam and Danny for, taking us through this powerful tool, for giving us the background on all of the robust and extensive data and kind of construction that really went into building it. And Danny, thanks so much for connecting this to, planning and strategy and ultimately planting and, being able to enjoy these resources in our communities. So really appreciate this from our panelists. We've been receiving some great questions in the chat, so we'll get started with some now, but definitely encourage you all to continue dropping them in into the question feature that you'll see on the side of your screen, because we'll try to get through as many as we can here to help you all get started in using this tool. So first off, just a couple of kind of clarifying questions, I think, for folks around the data itself. So we have questions around, how often is the data updated, and how often, at least maybe, are updates planned? And then related to that, with these updates, would it be clear then to see any changes to the scores over the years so we could somehow track progress and improvements over time? So I think, Adam, you may be best to speak.
I'll take that, because it's an excellent question that's been asked at every single demonstration that we've given of tree equity scores. I must start building it into the first bit. So the short answer is we will get canopy cover updates annually. That's the current plan. The data on things like the census and indices of deprivation will be updated when they're updated, really. So that's decadal for the census. I think between 5 to 10 years typically for the IMD. So, it's relatively static, but not immobile. It will change over time. So this is a long-term tool for tree planning. But I think critically, the annual updates canopy cover will be a massive leap forward for us in the UK in terms of having that. Now, can you compare it and change over time? I asked that question to Google. I think the methods that uses deep learning, sort of machine learning, to calculate the canopy cover. We've done quite a lot of quality assurance on that, and I don't think if anyone's got detailed questions on that, they can contact me directly. But we're really confident it's good quality data. But what that means is that system changes over time, so you can't really do a kind of fixed point like a like-for-like comparison. But it will be similar, and I think it will give people a tool they can use to look at change over time. But you'll just have to add in those caveats around the way the data's sort of arrived at.
Great, thank you so much. There's a related question in here around, if I'm using this app, this tool to manage, to plant, the necessary trees where they ought to be, and the question is, how do I make that reflect in the map? How do I communicate it? But maybe there's also a broader kind of question here about how do we track our own progress and inventory and ensure that in our different efforts that they ultimately end up speaking to one another. Any guidance around that within either the tool or within local planning efforts and local practices?
Yeah, okay, so the trees aren't going to show up for 20 years or so, or or once they start establishing and getting a canopy, over time, the trees will appear. So as a short-term sort of change measurement thing, it's not, I don't think there'll be a tool probably that would do that. You're just working on tree time. As the urban forest kind of expands and contracts over time, the tool will pick that up and monitor it. But you always have to deal with the fact that you've got to get on with it and plant trees, and you'll reap those benefits at the point at which they start to establish. I think in the States, it's been used to kind of prioritise, broadly as a prioritisation tool, so bringing equity into those urban forest plans and having a really good story about, and an evidence-based story about the benefits that those trees are bringing to people. And it's really enabling a high level of precision in terms of where you invest money and resources into trees, and making that data available to everyone is catalysing community action alongside city councils, municipal authorities in the States. So I hope that gives a bit of a flavour. Danni, is there anything you want to add on that?
I think you answered it really well, Adam. Yeah.
And I just add, here in the US, so there's been a little bit more time to uptake this tool and put it into practice. And we've seen, while we don't have a robust tree inventory tool embedded in here yet, that is on the wish list, so that sounds great. But we've seen many organizations and localities do a great job of their own monitoring and tracking, and to be able to bring these two data sets together when they're evaluating and updating their strategies. Great. So also on the data piece and kind of really bringing this down to local decision making, there's some questions in here about how to work with sort of the shapes and the polygons and how the sort of way that this data is presented. So a couple of questions here. One, folks maybe don't see their city or their community on the map. Why might that be? And if they're not seeing it, but it should be in the data, how can they best find that within the broader UK map? And then the other is, question about, either filtering data down to a certain type of borough or jurisdictional boundary, or seeing if that shape and extent of these shaped polygons can be altered to somehow reflect, like these local boundaries. Do you all have any guidance for how to work with how the data is presented on that scale?
Take that one, Danni, because I've answered that question because we've been asked it quite a lot. So we're using small area geography here, so lower super output areas in England, data zones in Scotland, etc. So that's how the census, that's the geography that the census uses. It's the geography that the index of multiple deprivation uses, and things like the COVID, when we look at COVID instances, that was all done at lower super output area. So it's neighbourhood level really, but what that means is, so it's not a political geography. So council wards, constituencies, I think from early inquiries we've had, ideally we'd build those in as a future layer so that you'd be able to overlay them and look. Maybe there'd be some clever composite aggregation you could do to start looking at scores at a political geography level. But we're using really a kind of science, evidence-based geography to calculate the score, not a political one. And those political boundaries do change over time. The LSOA boundaries don't really, which is another advantage of using them. But there are kind of drawbacks to it in that, it means that like things like council wards, it would be convenient to look at those as well. Something for the future, probably.
Yeah, it's difficult with broadband. They can change at different times as well. They're not necessarily all updated kind of at the same time. But I guess you also do get that sort of combined score when you sort of zoom out and you look at the whole local authority. I know it's not down to ward level, but you can at least look at that combined score at the first level. Yeah,
that would suggest it may well be possible to aggregate just at a kind of medium level, perhaps somewhere in between local authority and LSOA.
Okay. So we have a question here for the tree officers. The question is, will they be using this to inform their decision-making process when considering planning applications which involve tree loss as opposed to tree planting? And also, will they use this to consider landscaping plans that would mitigate for tree loss in low or high equity areas?
Well, I kind of have the same question, really. We don't know the answer to it yet, but we had a number of tree officers helped in the development of the tool, and these kind of things have been raised, like how can we use this as sort of protection, sort of canopy preservation tool? And I think it can, I get the sense it can definitely be used like that, but we're right at the beginning of that sort of journey, if you like, to use that word. It definitely links to things like the work that Natural England have been doing on green infrastructure standards, which looks at an urban tree canopy standard, and that idea of, having goals for preserving canopy at a kind of a neighbourhood level. I feel like this tool is going to be a really important way of measuring that at the outset. So I think that the answer would be hopefully, yes, all that will happen. And if there's anyone listening who wants a more detailed conversation, very up for that. So please get in touch. We're already having conversations like this with tree officers and others. So we'd welcome a chance to talk it through further. There's a connection into planning policy thing that it's just very early days for that. But in the States, tree equity is kind of now getting it's being used in local policy. And I think if we can kind of demonstrate its use in the UK, then I think there's no reason why we wouldn't hope to see something similar in terms of, helping to guide local policy on trees and equity outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to build off of that, Adam, we've seen in some communities the tool is used to influence local land use planning decisions. So if there's a development coming up and it's in a high need area, can influence in some cases decisions around tree loss, but also tree planting, what's coming with this development, and so can inspire local advocacy around that.
Kind of opens the door. Yeah, sorry, you go, Lida. No, you go. Okay.
Well, I think this is interesting, all the different kind of use cases for this tool, and like really you all on the call are the ones who have, that connections to where this can go. So we're taking notes for sure. There's a question here about tree canopy targets. So where does this target come from is the question, and how is that generated?
So given the time, my best answer there is have a look at the methodology section on the website, because there's some text that says exactly where it's come from. But effectively, the short answer would be consultation with experts, arriving at a 30% figure, using the work in the US as a reference point, existing tree strategies, both domestic and global. But looking firstly at the UK really, and what are sort of local authorities setting at the aspirational end of kind of tree targets, but not trying to go beyond that. We don't want to come up with unrealistic figures. And I think the move from population to building density, which will hopefully come in the next update, will help to really hone it down in terms of some of those targets.
Yeah,
we've tested them a bit. I get the sense they're like there or thereabouts. They're not going to be precise in every. They're not going to be precisely the right figure. They're a kind of starting place for people to do the kind of ground truth thing.
Yeah, great. And really where those targets in the tool meet, like Adam's describing, kind of your local reality and feasibility and resources and how you can approach that is really the key to being successful. So Danny, maybe this question is good for you and your experience working with different localities around this planning and strategy. So the question is around, tree strategies were mentioned, but are there any existing strategies or resources that you'd recommend in addition to this tree equity score tool for local authorities wanting to create their own tree strategy? What other strategies or resources might help complement this tool?
Oh, it's a really good question. There's a lot of, there's actually so many resources. I feel a bit under pressure now to remember all of them, but a couple that jump to mind. So I think this is a really nice tool, as I said, that very first stage, that foundation stage where you first start looking at what you've got and start building on those prioritizations. You can obviously then go into looking at assessing, what you already have. I think it's really important to have a really clear understanding of your current situation in order to plan strategically for the future. There have been some really useful guides produced by the Tree Council, by TDAG, by lots of other organisations kind of in that sector around writing tree strategies. Also, Treeconomics were hosting a series of workshops to support people with writing their tree strategies and also solving problems. It's a big piece of work, and it takes a lot of thinking and a lot of planning to get a really robust tree strategy and get that kind of engagement and buy-in from not just your internal team but the wider council and also your local community. So yeah, that's a good place to start, but I'd be more than happy to chat with anybody about tree strategy work or getting started at any point, so please feel free to drop us an email, or I think there'll probably be a survey after this if you want to pop a note in the box to say you'd appreciate some guidance or support. I'd be more than happy to get in touch.
Excellent, thanks, Danny. Same offer goes here from American Forest. If there are use cases or tools that have been successful here and might be transferable, we'd be really happy to help support you all in that with Treeconomics and Woodland Trust. So I think that's actually all that we have time for today. I know there's so many really good questions in the chat here, but I think that just means that there are a lot of ways to start to put this into use and interest in that. So I'll hand it over to Nadine.
Thanks, Lida. Thanks, everyone. Before we finish the webinar, I just wanted to give a quick mention to a gentleman called Paul Akers, who sadly passed away recently. He was a tree officer in Westminster for 45 years, and much of the lovely tree cover in Westminster is thanks to Paul. His funeral is on the 26th of February, and if you would like to attend, you can find out more information from the London Tree Officers Association. Thank you very much to Mark Johnston for mentioning this in the chat today. So thanks to all of our speakers. Before you go, Danny, would you just kindly share the slide on the iTree conference? We've got a conference this year in June, and it's in Dundee.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the conference is it's all about how to get data out of your urban forests and use this data to make change on the ground. And there are many local authorities in the UK that have been able to use iTree and other data to secure funding for tree planting and tree maintenance, as it really does give a really good evidence base with which you can use it to communicate the benefits of trees and the benefits your urban forests are providing, and why it's important to invest in them. So you don't need to know anything about iTree to attend, but this is a really great opportunity to find out about what others are doing with data and how it could potentially help you with your urban forests. There will be speakers from around Europe and the UK. And on the Friday, we're all hopping on a coach to do a treescapes tour of Dundee, which will be fantastic, which is completely optional, but it's free of charge. And the conference looks to cover its own costs. So we're not making a profit on this. We're just trying to run it so that everybody can learn lots of good stuff and have a good time. And our early bird price is available right now. And what I'm going to do is just pop the link in the chat there for you. It's also on our website. Okay, so thanks to all of our lovely speakers today, and we hope you've enjoyed yourselves. We will get in touch with you if you've asked a question that we weren't able to get to. So thank you for all your questions, and we'll see you at our next webinar, which will be in March. And follow us on LinkedIn, Treeconomics on LinkedIn, to find out about that one. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.